I wrote a book called I Married a Travel Junkie. And in this book, there is a chapter in which we're looking for gorillas in the Bwindi National Forest. We go up into this mountain, we're looking for gorillas. I followed my wife to 54 countries around the world, not because I love to travel, I hate to travel, but I love my wife. And since that is so meaningful to her, I could not allow her to live a part of a life that I didn't know about, or else it was as if there was a whole room in our relationship that was locked. But I didn't understand about relationships. I really didn't know how to make a relationship work. And I was taught how to do it by one of the gorillas that I met. We finally found the silverback who was lounging under a tree, and there must have been about 5 or 10 females around him. All of a sudden, I heard this loud crack, and there was a 4-year-old gorilla, a young female, who had been quietly eating greenery. And I stepped into her zone of comfort. So she picked up a small tree and she cracked it with her hands. And I looked at her and I backed away. And she looked at me. She put the tree down and she went back to eating. I'd had a transaction with this gorilla. And the transaction was this: the two of us can live, but you've got to give me my space and I'll give you yours. I learned that there has to be a line and you must never go over that line. And that's the key to success of a relationship.
Hello, it's Chuck from Above the Basement, Boston Music in Conversation. Dr. Jay Kaiser is known to many as MIT Professor Emeritus of Linguistics. He's written several books and countless essays and poems throughout his prolific career, centering in his love for language. Jay is a jazz trombonist in the highly regarded Aardvark Jazz Orchestra, which happens to be the oldest continuous jazz ensemble in the country. Whether you know Jay as a writer, poet, musician, philosopher, or teacher, it's clear when you talk with him that there is a thirst for knowledge and true love of life. Jay talked to us about his experience with a life-changing event in 2014 when an accident left him without any movement of his extremities at the age of 79. Defining resilience, Jay candidly talked to us about his incredible recovery, his difficult yet exciting new chapter in music and writing, and also his relationship with his wonderful wife. So here's our conversation with Dr. Jay Kaiser, recorded in his apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Okay.
Enough about that microphone, Jay.
Luckily, we weren't recording.
I've been censoring myself for the last 15 minutes.
You have?
We're already explicit, and we haven't even started yet.
Okay.
We can put a little E next to the episode.
We are running.
And we're really excited to be here talking with you. Dr. Jay Kaiser.
You know, what's interesting about this view is I can look across and see the hospital where I first met you.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
That's bizarre, and here we are.
Isn't it amazing?
Across the river.
I mean, this was the hospital that saved my life. Who would have thought I'd end up in an apartment where it's the view?
I know. Can't make this you-know-what up.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, so this is going to be non-explicit then?
Thank you, Chuck.
Oh, God. Doctor, I'm so sorry. I apologize for this crude language we have going on here. But yes, thank you for inviting us into your home. I love the view. I love that you can see the subway going across.
Yeah.
There. It's almost like a little toy subway going across.
Question.
Yes.
How many cars on a subway?
My guess would be like, what, 8, 10?
6.
Yeah,
6. Is that just the red line, though?
That's just the red line.
Yeah.
That's the only one I can see.
It would have to be as long as each of the stations, right? Couldn't be longer.
Yeah.
We'll have to see if that's a universal number with the blue and the green.
No, the green's definitely not.
You think it's more or less?
I think it's less.
Oh, green's got just 2 cars.
Some of them are really small because the stations are really tiny, too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to sit here and look at the buildings and look at the red line reminds me of, Jay, with your other place that you lived in across the street. You told me the story of watching a building being constructed before your very eyes for a couple of years.
Oh, yeah, right.
And how that the person that was in charge of the Lunder building,
Yeah,
to where you started your journey.
He came to visit me. I had written an email to a vice president of their construction company telling them how wonderful I thought the workers were. Because, for a couple of years, Nancy and I watched these guys, and they are incredibly skilled. Anyway, so I sent this vice president an email, and he somehow or other sent it back down here, and it got to Mike's office, and Mike tacked it up outside his office door. He invited me for a tour of the building. And I said, I can't. I'm in a wheelchair. Why don't you come and see us and you can see the building from our perspective? Well, anyway, he came over. He brought me a hard hat. And it says Professor Kaiser on the front.
Very nice.
And so I said to him, how did you get the job of being superintendent of this? And he said, well, it was the job I did before. It was a hospital. And he said, I have to tell you, it was the best project I've ever worked on. I said, what's the name of it? Well, it's the Lunder Building. Do you know it? And my mouth dropped open. I said, that's where they saved my life. They opened up my back from the base of my skull to below my shoulder blades, and they did what's called a laminectomy, which was to essentially smooth the spine as much as they could in order to take the pressure off my spinal cord. The neurosurgeon who worked on me said that I had, and this is a quote, he told Nancy, Jay has the crappiest spine I have ever seen. And it was just riddled with barnacles. I mean, it was like the keel of an ancient ship.
Yeah, you're known for a lot of things, Jay, but to add that to the list of the crappiest spine.
Well, it's going to be on my tombstone. Yeah. Here lies the guy with the crappiest spine you'd ever seen.
So I guess circling back to the fact that we, Chuck and I are sitting here in this beautiful view with you and your wife, Nancy, and to say the least, there's been this 4-year success story.
26 April 2014.
When I meet people in my day job that have success in rehabilitation, usually, it's a bell-shaped curve, of course, but a lot of the people have had some success in their lives beforehand. So in other words, it surprised me how far you've come, but also it didn't surprise me because of the drive and what you have in you. And so when we first met, we talked, and you told me about your life, and one thing was a goal of getting back to music because that was a passion of yours. What I saw in you was that one of the first things, of course you want to be with your beautiful wife too, but one of the first things that came to you was, I have to play trombone, I have to have music.
I noticed in the course of my rehabilitation that there were people who were injured as badly as I was, or not as badly, who didn't make it. They just went through the motions. And I wondered why. Why should I have managed to break out of the paper bag of paralysis, and they haven't? And I think you've put your finger on it, and it really has to do with what kind of life they had before. That was a goal to get back to. And that's how it was with me. I was angry that my body had snatched that life away from me, and I wasn't going to let it get away with it if I could help it. It was a kind of a war that I was having with my body, and music was a huge part of it. I could tell you all of the things that music does for me, and I don't think any of them would come anywhere near to explaining the role it played. Way before this accident, my first marriage was breaking up, and when it broke up, I was really depressed. Every Saturday, I would rehearse with the MIT Concert Jazz Band. The leader of the band would come and pick me up, and we'd go to a Greasy Spoon, and then I would go and rehearse for 4 hours. And when I came out of the rehearsal, it was amazing. The depression disappeared. Of course, it would leach back into my psyche over the week, but come Saturday, it would all go away again. And I don't think that's insignificant. There's something deeply true about the human psyche that when you focus on one thing like that, where depression can't enter, it dissipates. But when you don't have any one thing to focus on, depression sort of covers your head like a fog. But being able to just play, that was kind of the general role that it took. But then there's the other things. I think it was Wynton Marsalis who said that in a jazz band, the function of all of the musicians is to make you sound as good as you can be when you're soloing, and that's your job when somebody else is soloing. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense of community there. And
we've talked about that, about listening and that group dynamic.
Yes, and it's not even just about you being able to play for yourself, but you being able to play to support the other people in the band. That was probably another goal for you, to be able to support those people who were playing along with you.
It was a very human thing. I guess the way to put it is we're social animals, and playing in a band is a remarkable way of being social. If you're going to do it well, you've got to listen to everybody.
Right.
And they've got to listen to you. I guess there must be other activities like it, but it's an activity where everybody is paying attention to everybody else.
How long after the surgery was it until you were able to pick up a trombone again?
Interesting. I had the incredible good luck of having been in the Air Force. I was in the Air Force from 1962 to 65. Turns out that it made me eligible for VA health care. If I hadn't been eligible for VA health care, I wouldn't be here in this apartment. I wouldn't have that wonderful view that you talked about. I'd be in some crummy place that I could barely afford, and I probably wouldn't even be able to walk. As soon as they took me in there, they said the word in the ward was, we're getting a patient who'll probably never walk again, but let's see what we can do. So around the 13th or 14th week, when I go down to the gym at the VA, I say to them, can we incorporate playing the trombone into my rehabilitation? And they said, oh, sure, they'd love it. So a friend of mine, Mike Strauss, had a P-bone. It's a plastic trombone, and it weighed about 2 pounds. I couldn't even hold it. The therapists in the gym would put this P-bone on my shoulder and hold it for me, and I had my regular mouthpiece. And so they'd put the mouthpiece into the horn, and I would go up to it, and I'd go... And that's when I started.
That's when you restarted.
Yeah.
It was only using your mouth. You couldn't use your hands yet?
Couldn't use my hands. Couldn't even hold the darn thing.
So it was just about blowing into the mouthpiece?
Just blowing into the mouthpiece. The way you could tie me to my bed was to put a sheet over my arm. I mean, I couldn't lift the weight of a sheet. I got to tell you, by the way, that the trombone is a perfect instrument for me. Yeah. Because, look, my hands have come back, but I do not have small motor control in the fingertips.
No, I remember that early on.
Yeah.
You know, this is an occupational therapy. It's a testament to OTs and to your ability, your drive, and your daily, as you said, war against your body, is because you would get incrementally better every day at this, or every week. But the OTs could push you with the upper extremity ability to move your arm.
One of the nurses there took 2 socks and rolled them up into a ball and made a little device for me. The ball of the sock fit into my palm, and so I could squeeze this. And I kept squeezing it every day. I put it on in the morning, and I just keep squeezing all day. I got better at it. Pretty soon I could hold the horn, and then I could actually play tunes in first position. The tune that I played best was taps.
Because you just needed to use your airway. And
your
embouchure.
And the embouchure. And then I could go out to second position and then third, and gradually I got better and better. Well, it turns out that in my last days at the VA, a guy came in who had a tumor on his spine. They had to take it out. Well, it turns out he plays piano. Well, then we started to play. Well, I'll tell you one story. There were my 3 angels at MGH. Lara and Christina and Nicole.
Yeah.
And they're all...
PTOT speech.
They're all knockouts.
You know Charlie's Angels.
I do.
Jay's Angels.
They're all really very beautiful, beautiful people. These 3 friends were going to come and visit me at the VA. The idea was that we were going to play, and Lara, who's a singer, was going to sing.
Yeah.
So Joe had to go to Jamaica Plain VA to have a molar removed, and they gave him Percodan.
Oh, jeez.
And when he came back to the ward, he was really in pain. And Joe was sort of lying there saying, geez, Jay, I'm so sorry, but I don't feel good. I don't think I can do this. And then the 3 of them walk in, and then Joe says, well, on second thought, why don't we give it a try?
Instant adrenaline rush.
Right. And so we had a neat little jam session there, and some of the people in the corridor would stop and look in, and it was just a great feeling.
Well, there's so much in that, Jay. I mean, there's the power of music, of course, to carry you through, but there's that diligence of the goal setting. Whether it's music or not music, it's building on what you have and needing to build on that more. I think back to that building that was constructed before your very eyes, and I think about I think of that as sort of or you as a personified version of that.
That's right. It was an objectification of what was happening to me. As the building got bigger and filled out, so did I.
So you're a trombone player. Do you have other abilities to play like a saxophone or a trumpet? Do you have any?
No.
It sounds like your willpower was so strong. I wonder if, even if you did play the sax or something that required a little bit more dexterity, do you think you would have gotten to that place where you could have picked up the trumpet or something that required more dexterity, just like you did for the trombone?
I don't know.
It's kind of a rhetorical question more than that. I mean, how are you supposed to know? But
look, I'll tell you what that really touches on, Chuck, and it's a really a good question. The interesting thing about my VA therapy was that every week they had a different goal for me. So, for example, my first therapy was sitting on an edge of a mat that could adjust its height. All they told me to do was just sit there. I couldn't do it. I'd fall over. Okay, so
there's less tangible muscles because those are the muscles holding up the neck and the back and the abdomen. And these are the things we take for granted that you're sitting up right now.
Yeah.
The hands and the arms are more tangible. We don't think about those muscles as being lost.
The subconscious muscles, like,
Well, right. I mean, they're the core muscles.
What I noticed was that with my therapy, there'd be a goal, and I couldn't, then one day I could. It was like turning on a light switch. I couldn't sit. Then all of a sudden, hey, I'm sitting. How did I feel about that? Whenever I achieved a goal, I was depressed. You'd think I'd be elated, but I wasn't. There was always that touch of depression. Why?
There's something else more.
Exactly.
Every time.
Every time I was climbing from one mountaintop to the other, and there was nothing but mountaintops.
What is fascinating to me about that right there, and I'm going to bring up your age a little bit because I think, what are you, like 62 right now?
Yeah.
So no, you're like 82, right?
82, yeah.
But what's amazing is that most people in life go through a point. Chuck and I are experiencing this right now, maybe Chuck more than me, where you just decline and you get worse, right? You got better over 4 years and you're still getting better.
Yeah.
Which is amazing to me.
Yeah.
That's what's wild about injury, is that, of course, this was a terrible thing that happened to you. But the fascinating thing about people like you is that you just wanted more and got more, and you're still getting better.
I'm better at the trombone now than I ever was.
Yeah, so I want to hear about that.
My motto is, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
You've definitely done that. Maybe I could turn to Nancy, too. Are there ways that Jay is getting better still?
I think his music, more than anything else, his playing has so much more soul and heart and energy. When he practices, he really practices as if it's a performance. The fact that he's now playing with Aardvark, the jazz orchestra that he belongs to, that was extremely important to him. And the first time he played with them, he was still in his wheelchair and couldn't get up on the stage. It was at a church, and he was in front of the pew, but he still joined in on one of the numbers. Yeah. And then he worked his way up to the stage, and it was always something that the next time he was going to be better. And they didn't make any excuses for him or make things easier for him.
The musicians, actually, remember the bass player, John Funkhauser, said,
yes.
It was commented about how my playing sounded more intense and more emotional.
I mean, you kind of had to start baby steps with just blowing into the mouthpiece.
Yeah.
Like anybody, I guess, who would start the trombone as an elementary school kid
right.
would have to do the same thing, how to purse your lips and doing all that. You're starting from scratch.
Right.
And I wonder if going over those elementary parts of how you play an instrument, going over those again, kind of just reinforced like the basics of it, and not even talking about just the inspiration and the strength that you use to really kind of start playing again. But I wonder if, because you had to start over, how did that, you think, affect the way you play now?
I have a friend who runs a big band in town, and he's has very strong ideas about how you play a wind instrument. As I was relearning, he was giving me cues on what I needed to do, how you hold your tongue, how you breathe, how you relax, all of that sort of stuff. And so a lot of that is true, but I really think that the fundamental thing is this. I am not a natural musician. I mean, I wish I were, but I'm not. There are guys out there who are just players. I'm not a natural. I have to work at it, but fortunately I love it. And I think what happened was When I suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury, something sort of clicked, and I said, hey, what difference does it make if I play badly? Just play. And I did that. In other words, I stopped being my own worst enemy on playing. And I think that's really the bottom part. I just sort of didn't worry about whether I was any good.
You conditioned yourself over time in the background of a brain that knew how to play trombone.
Yeah.
Over a few years. I mean, you started when? Your teens or 20s?
Let's see. I started when I was 10. I played trumpet. Then I played trombone until I was about 20. Then I put it down for about 30 years.
30 years.
Then I picked it up again.
Yeah, so you took a couple years off, 30.
Yeah.
And you did something else with your life. You're a wonderful trombone player, and you play in the Aardvark Orchestra, and I want to hear more about that, and the Liberty Orchestra as well, right?
Oh, yeah, the New Liberty Jazz
New Liberty Jazz Band,
Dixieland Band, yeah.
Yeah. When you look at Dr. J. Kaiser, there's a couple other things that come up, and one is that you have a history in a small institution called Massachusetts Institute of Technology. You know a thing or two about linguistics.
Yeah.
I've always been interested in the language of music. What's really been interesting to me about you per se is the structure of language and words and your expertise and your poetry and what you've been able to do in your career with your incredible way with words and your books that you've written. To have that connect in some way to music is beautiful. I wonder about how that all connects.
I love thinking about language. It's really quite a remarkable function of the brain, but not because it's language. There's something deeper about it, which is really quite incredible. Right now, I'm holding a microphone. It's a big microphone, and it's heavy, and it's composed of plastic, metal. There's all kind of electronics inside. But this microphone can't think. But inside your head is the same matter that comprises this microphone. The same matter. It's made up of the same stuff. And yet it's organized in a different way, and all of a sudden it can think. How did matter come to think? Because language is sort of the external evidence of what's inside our head, thinking. And that's a huge question. How is it that the brain thinks? Because it's nothing but atoms, and yet it's organized. How did that come about?
Took a long time.
Well, yes, it did take a long time. On the other hand, in eternity, there's no such thing as a long time. Over there behind Chuck, a piece of rock, Nancy will get for you. And this piece of rock was given to me by a geologist.
Don't touch it, Chuck.
I won't touch it. I'll break it.
Hold that, Chuck.
Okay, thank you.
You are now holding in your hand the oldest rock in the world.
Come on, Jay. Here, throw it over here.
Okay, so, I'm 82.
Well, not just you're 82. I mean, humans have been around for, 150,000 years or
At
something?
most, yeah. The ones who suddenly could think. The ones who nature suddenly said, hey, if I put this little gidget over here and put this little gidget there, bzzz, starts to think.
How does music play a role in communication that has no words? How can we communicate in a jazz band with four of us playing and we're not speaking a word, but we translate, like you said, there's matter. Matter constructs our brains from an atomic level.
Yeah.
Somehow there's ability for that to come together to construct thoughts that come out in music.
Very deep questions. I mean, we'll never know that in your lifetime or mine. I mean, we don't even know how the symbol tree is represented in the wetware of the brain. Of course, we always want to answer the tough questions. If you step back a little bit and ask yourself, easy, a yes-no question. Mm-hmm. The man is here. Is the man here? Now, you would think that child learning that, the simplest possible hypothesis the child could make about the language is, the way you make a yes-no question is you line the words up, moving from left to right. You find the first occurrence of some form of the verb to be and move it to the left. So you see the man is here. You go, is, move it to the front, is the man here? Well, around the time when a kid is 4 years old, the kid acquires the ability to understand relative clauses. The man who is from Philadelphia is here. Well, since the kid had that rule, the one that we thought, you'd think that the kid would say, is the man who from Philadelphia is here? They never make that mistake. They always get it right. They always say, is the man who is from Philadelphia here? What that means is that the class of hypotheses that a child brings to learning a language is limited. When it comes to language learning in the frontal lobe, the class of hypotheses that the child will bring in hearing languages is going to be highly constrained. And one universal thing is, No language in the world ever pays attention to number. There is no rule in any language in the world that says move the third word to the front.
That's never certainly occurred to me. I mean, it makes sense when you spell it out like that. It's like, of course,
Has it never occurred to
that's
you?
how.
No.
You know, I mean, it's fascinating because these are things you just kind of take for granted in your brain. Like this, I understand that the 4-year-old kid is doing that and probably couldn't explain why. I couldn't explain why, but the way you just explained it, it's like, yes, okay, of course, it makes total sense. You just move the to be and over here, and it becomes a question rather than a statement.
Right.
But it's fascinating to hear you say it out loud like that.
What you would say is that whenever you hear a string of words, it's never a linear string. There's always a structure on top of that string of words, and that structure looks like trees that have been binarily branched. And it turns out that one of the universals of language is that every language is structurally dependent, that the rules depend on the shape of the structure. Well, that's telling us something about how the brain works.
And is that structure seen in some of the classic writings in music?
Yeah, there is a strong possibility that the similar kinds of structures play a role in looking at a piece of music. Schenker is the big theorist. He actually builds tree structures over works of music. The book to read, the seminal book there, I think, is a book by Fred Laerdal and Ray Jackendoff called A Generative Theory of Tonal Music, which shows that just as language is structural dependent, music also is structurable in terms of trees.
But you can think of these as almost the muscles that you needed to start working when they sat you down on that mat. These are muscles that just work on their own. You don't think when I'm saying
these are the take it for granted muscles.
Right. These are the same the structure that those words, those sentences, and those thoughts are built upon. You're not thinking about them. They just kind of make sense to you. They kind of.
I think that's a good analogy. I think that makes sense.
Well, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the foundation is almost like the foundation of a neurological ability.
It's why
Yeah.
a classical piece or whatever kind of music you're listening to hits you. You don't think about the structure of the piece that's coming at you. The way that it is built, that's why it appeals to you.
You could say the same thing about language. When I'm speaking to you now, I mean, it's really quite a miracle. What am I doing? What I'm doing is I'm perturbing the molecules of air between my mouth and your ear. What I'm doing is I'm creating different kinds of sound waves. What your ear does is it takes those sound waves, interprets them as the bits of language in which we store words. When we finally understand how the brain works, we'll know that the world is not out there, but it's in here.
Aardvark, longest continually running jazz orchestra in the country.
That's right. I think 43 years now.
Continuously is the key word, right?
It's the continuous. Mark Harvey started it with some friends about 43 years ago, and he never stopped.
So Mark Harvey is the leader for 42 years of the Aardvark Jazz Orchestra. And how long you been in it, Jay?
I think I must have been in it for about 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
In Aardvark, you play free jazz. There's no charts.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be a melody line, and you're all listening to one another. And when it works, it's really quite incredible. But it's not the kind of jazz that you and I grew up on. I mean, it's very modal and it's very emotional. I mean, what you do is you try to play according to the emotion demanded of the piece. Well, you know what it's like. I mean, it's like what you did when you made the piece for Acadia National Park.
Yeah.
You called me into Woolly Mammoth, and Chuck was there.
That's where I met you, yeah.
And then you said, can you play this? And you sang a little thing. And I played it and then said, can you do it an octave higher? And I said, yeah. So then you recorded that. I mean, there's no written music. There's no chordal structure.
That example is something that is a melody that you reproduced. I guess I should ask the question, are there melodies that are classic in Mark's music?
Yeah, there are. There are melodies, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes you just begin breathing into your horn.
And you communicate with each other.
Yeah.
How does a conductor conduct an improvisational piece?
What he does is he has letters, and he holds up letters which tells us what section of the piece of music that we're playing we're going to go to next.
The letter corresponds to a page?
A section in the music.
A section in the...
Yeah.
It's very unorthodox.
Yeah, it is.
How often are you performing?
About 6 times a year.
6 times a year?
Now, do you have CDs that...
oh, yeah, we've got CDs.
So we can give those some plugs?
We have 15 CDs. Also, if you go to the New Liberty Jazz Band...
Right, that's a Dixieland
That's
jazz.
the Dixieland. I used to play in that New Liberty Jazz Band, of course. Most of our gigs were on a fire truck, and the fire truck was a 1941 fire truck. Oh. There's a mixer on board and a piano.
On the fire truck?
On the fire truck.
Wow. Permanently installed there.
Permanently installed. And
awesome.
Then there's speakers all around. So and then not only that, but the fire truck can turn into a stable stage.
That's great.
But the main thing that's happened is that a subset of the members, we formed a group, and they come here and rehearse every 2 weeks. We call ourselves the Dixie Sticklers.
I got to come see you. It's been too long.
Well, I've
never seen you.
Well, you find it very interesting.
So we want to hear you play. We
sure.
don't want to take up all your time, and
I did have one last question. It's something that you mentioned before that I thought was really great. That once you stopped caring about sounding good, that's when you
No, that's right.
That's where you found the joy in playing.
Yeah.
Right? That's a lesson for any kid who's just starting out and any parent who's listening to that kid starting to play, because it's going to sound terrible. There's no way around it. Until you start getting better at your instrument, it's always going to sound terrible.
Right.
Once you stop caring about it sounding good, that's when you'll start to sound good.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting that you said that. Once you stop caring about sounding good, that's when you found the joy in it.
That's right. That's when you begin to put your ego out of the picture so that you can make sure that the space between your ideas and your instrument is uncluttered. And your ego is a big hindrance. You got to get the ego out of there.
And it's not even just kids. I do it today.
We all do it.
Everyone does it. And so once you stop caring about being perfect, then that's when you really find those magical moments, I think.
Yeah, well, as they say, perfect is the enemy of good.
I want to say you are someone that I've met over the last few years. What you've done can't be really quantified, I think. It's the quality, not the quantity, of what you've been able to show. And you've been able to teach me just visiting you. Forget about the medicine stuff. So I want to thank you. And it's really special to be here because on many levels, you've taught me things both in rehabilitation and recovery, but all in other spheres as well. And certainly in creativity and just drive. When I think of you, I think of drive. And I want to thank you for what you teach others that you may not realize along the way.
I'm glad that I've been able to do that. Before we end, there's just one thing I have to make clear. I couldn't have done any of this if it weren't for Nancy. I mean, when I was really at my lowest, she kicked me in the butt and she said to me, look, I'll be with you, but only if you give 100%. And I want a relationship with you. I don't want to become a caregiver and not a wife. I didn't need much more than that.
Thanks, Jay.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right. Yes, thank you both.
Sunny side of the street.
We would like to thank Jay and Nancy for inviting us to their lovely apartment and for their hospitality. And for more information about the Aardvark Jazz Orchestra, go to aardvarkjazz.com. Go to abovethebasement.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter, listen and subscribe to our podcast, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and look at all the nice pictures we post on Instagram. We are everywhere. On behalf of Ronnie and myself, thanks for listening, tell your friends, and remember, Boston music, like its history, is unique.